everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 of Iron Man by Tony Iommi. Chapter 5 is called Out of the Shadows into the Limelight. Here we go. Dad and all his brothers played the accordion, so they were quite a musical family. What I really wanted was a set of drums. I obviously had no room to put them in, and certainly wouldn't be able to play them in the house, so it was the accordion or nothing. I started playing it when I was about 10 years old. I still have a picture of me as a kid in our backyard, holding my bloody accordion. We had a gramophone at home, or a radiogram as it was called. It was a unit with a record player on it and 2 speakers, and I used to have a little radio. Because I was in my room a lot, it was either listen to that or what do I do? I can't go and sit in the lounge because we don't have one. I listened to the Top 20 or Radio Luxembourg. That's where my love of music originated, sitting in my room and listening to great instrumental guitar bands like The Shadows on my little radio. It made me want to play the guitar as well. I really loved that sound. It was instrumental stuff, and I knew this is what I want to do. So eventually my mother bought me a guitar. She was very good that way. She worked hard and saved up for it. Being left-handed, you were limited to what you could get, certainly in those days. A left-handed guitar? What's that? There was this electric Watkins rapier that I saw in a catalog. It cost something like 20 pounds, and Mum paid it off in weekly installments. My left-handed Watkins had 2 pickups and a couple of little chrome selector switches that you push, and it came with a little Watkins Westminster amp. I stole one of the speakers from our radiogram and put it in that amp, which didn't go down very well, but it hardly mattered because my parents didn't play music that much anyway. So there I was with my first little kit, playing away in my room. I'd listen to the Top 20 and wait for the Shadows to come on to tape them with a microphone on this old reel-to-reel so I could try and learn their songs. Later I'd get the album and learn the songs from playing that over and over. I've always liked going back to the Shadows, as I like melodies and tunes. And I've always tried to make my guitar playing melodic, as music is all about melody. Me trying to do that comes from those very early days. That stayed with me. It has always been a part of my songwriting. I like the Beatles, but the Shadows and Cliff Richard were more based on the rock and roll stuff than the Beatles, so they were more my thing. Of course, I liked Elvis as well, but not as much as Cliff and the Shadows. They were it for me. Cliff was bigger in England than Elvis was, and that might have had something to do with it. I've met Cliff a few times, but I never said to him, "Oh, I was a big fan of yours." After school, I'd sit upstairs and play my guitar for a couple hours. I really took to the guitar and practiced as much as I could, but bands weren't immediately knocking on the door asking me to join. That's why my first venue was with Albert. He was going to be the singer, and I would take care of the music. He couldn't sing, but he thought he could. His house was rather posh. It had 2 living rooms. We'd be in the front room with me and my aunt playing away and him singing, and you'd always hear his dad shouting from the other room, "Shut that bloody row up! Can't you go somewhere else?" We only knew one song which we played over and over, Jezebel by Frankie Lane. We must have been 12 or 13 years old then, and Albert used to wail, "If ever the devil was born without a pair of horns, it was you, Jezebel, it was you." So that's what really started it all. After that I hooked up with this piano player and his drummer. They were a lot older than me, and they asked me if I'd play with them in this pub. I couldn't play very well, but they thought I was great. I only did that a couple times. I was incredibly nervous sitting in with these guys, but it was just something I would do then. Blimey, a gig in a pub? I wasn't even old enough to be in a pub, but those were the first gigs I ever did. Ron and Joan Woodward lived a couple doors away from our shop. Ron visited us a lot. Him and his dad would be chatting and smoking away just about every night. He spent more time at our house than at his, and he became like another adopted son. He was probably 10 or 15 years older than me, but somehow I became friends with him. I talked him into buying a bass guitar. He started to learn to play it, and we actually did a couple little gigs, and everybody was going, "Well, he's a bit old, isn't he?" I'd just say, "He's my mate, and he wants to be in the band." That's how it was then. Your mate would be in your band. Can he play? Oh no, he can't play, but he's my mate. We had a rhythm guitarist and a drummer playing with us. We rehearsed about 3 times a week at this youth club. It was great. From piddling around by yourself in your room to playing music with other people was a fantastic experience. Nigel, the guitarist, was a bit cocky. One day he was singing and the mic suddenly stuck to him because it wasn't earth. He went rolling around on the floor and got a bad electric shock. Because nobody liked him, we all thought, it serves you right. But in the end, we did unplug him, so he survived. As a matter of fact, he was right as rain afterward, better than ever in fact. But he didn't last that long, and neither did that band. I couldn't wait to leave school. I didn't like it, and I don't think it liked me very much either. Everybody left school at 15, unless you stayed on and went to a college. 15 and that was it. You were out. And so was I. It was a great relief. I started looking for a job, and I applied myself to playing the guitar even more. Because I practiced all the time, I was getting much better than people like Ron Woodward, so I joined this other band which I thought was very good, the Rockin' Chevrolets. It must have been around 1964, so I was 16 or so. To my mind, they were really professional. They could play all the Shadow songs perfectly, and because a couple of the guys were older than me, they also did a lot of rock and roll. I'd never been a big fan of Chuck Berry, Gene Vincent, or Buddy Holly, but I now got into that music as well. The singer, Neil Morris, was the oldest guy in the band. There was a chap on bass called Dave Wadley, the drummer was called Pat Pegg, and the rhythm guitar player was Alan Meredith. That's when I met Alan's sister, Margaret. We were engaged to be married, actually. Our relationship would last a lot longer than the Chevrolets did. I don't remember how I got into this band. I probably saw an advert in a music shop window. That was your life. You'd hang around a music shop, or you'd go see another band playing, and you'd meet people through that. My parents were wary of me playing with this band in pubs. I even had to be home at a certain time, but after a little while, they were okay with it. Also because I brought some money in. The Rockin' Chevrolets made things easier for me as well by meeting Mum first. They came down and she made them bacon sandwiches. As she did in later years with Black Sabbath, the same thing. She'd always ask him if they wanted something to eat. Always. That's the sort of mother she was. The Rockin' Chevrolets started getting a lot of work. We all had the same red, lame suits, so we wore those at every gig. I didn't really have any money to spend on a suit, but you had to look the part. At the weekend, we played in pubs. One pub was in a bad part of Birmingham, and every bloody time we played there, there'd be a fight. We provided the soundtrack to their fighting. We also played the odd wedding, or we'd end up in a bloody social club playing to people twice our age who would go, "Ooh, you're too loud." Because things were getting more serious, I wanted a better guitar. Burns was one of the few companies that made left-handed guitars, so I bought me one of those, a Burns Trisonic. It had a control on it with the Trisonic sound, whatever that was. I only played it until I eventually found a left-handed Fender Stratocaster, and I had a Selmer amp with an echo in it. The Rockin' Chevrolets broke up because they kicked out Alan Meredith. My next big band was going to be the Birds and the Bees. I auditioned for them and got the job. They were professional, worked a lot, and were even due to go to Europe. I decided to really go for it, quit my job and become a professional musician. I was working as a welder in a factory at the time. I went to work on the Friday morning, my last day at the job, and at lunchtime I told Mom I wasn't going to go back for the afternoon shift, but she told me I had to and to finish the job properly. So I did. I went back to work, and then my whole world fell apart. That's the end of Chapter 5. Moving on to Chapter 6. Chapter 6 is called Why Don't You Just Give Me the Finger? Oh boy. So as I said, it was my last day at work. There was this lady who bent pieces of metal on a machine, and I then welded them together. Because she didn't come in that day, they put me on her machine. Otherwise, I'd have been standing around with nothing to do. I had never worked it, so I didn't know how to go about it. It was a big guillotine press with a foot pedal. You pulled this sheet in and put your foot down on the pedal, and then this thing came down with a bang and bent the metal. Things went all right in the morning. After I came back from my lunch break, I pushed the pedal and the press came straight down on my right hand. As I pulled my hand back as a reflex, I pulled the end of my fingers off. Stretch your hand out, then line up your index finger and your little finger and draw a line between the tops of them. It's the bits sticking out from the two fingers in the middle that got chopped off. The bones were sticking out of them. I just couldn't believe it. There was blood everywhere. I was so much in shock it didn't even hurt at first. They took me to hospital, and instead of doing something to stop the bleeding, they put my hand in a bag. It quickly filled up, and I thought, when am I going to get some help? I'm bleeding to death here. A little later, somebody brought the missing pieces to the hospital in a matchbox. They were all black, completely ruined, so they couldn't put them back on. Eventually, they cut skin from my arm and put it over the tips of my injured fingers. The nails had come straight off. They put a bit of beard back in one of them so that the nail would grow. They skin grafted it, and that was it. Then I just sat at home moping. I thought, that's it. It's over with. I couldn't believe my luck. I just joined a great band. It was my last day at work, and I was crippled for life. The manager of the factory came to see me a few times, an older, balding man with a thin mustache called Brian. He saw that I was really depressed, so one day he gave me this EP and said, "Put this on." I was going, "No, I don't really want to." Having to listen to music was certainly not going to cheer me up at that point. He said, "Well, I think you should, because I'll tell you a story. This guy plays guitar, and he only plays with two fingers. It was the great Belgian-born gypsy jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt, and bloody hell, it was brilliant." I thought, if he's done it, I can have a go at it as well. It was absolutely great of Brian to be thoughtful enough to buy me this. Without him, I don't know what would have happened. Once I heard that music, I was determined to do something about it instead of sitting there moping. I still had bandages on my fingers, so I tried playing with just my index finger and my little finger. It was very frustrating because once you played well, it's hard to go backwards. Probably the easiest thing would have been to flip the guitar upside down and learn to play right-handed instead of left-handed. I wish I had in hindsight, but I thought, well, I've been playing for a few years already. It's going to take me a few years to learn it that way. That seemed like a very long time, so I was determined to keep playing left-handed. I persevered with two bandaged-up fingers, even though the doctor said, the best thing for you to do is pack up, really. Get another job, do something else. But I thought, bloody hell, there's got to be something I can do. After thinking things through for a while, I wondered whether I could make a cap to fit over my fingers. I got a fairy liquid bottle, melted it down, shaped it into a ball, and waited until it cooled down. I then made a hole into it with a soldering iron until it sort of fitted over my finger. I shaped it a bit more with a knife, and then I got some sandpaper and sat there for hours, sandpapering it down to make it into a kind of thimble. I put it on one of my fingers and tried to play the guitar with it, but it didn't feel right. Because it was plastic, it kept slipping off the string and I could barely touch it. It was so painful. So I tried to think of something I could put over it. I tried a piece of cloth, but of course, it tore. I used different pieces of leather, which also didn't work. Then I found this old jacket of mine and cut a piece of leather off it. It was old leather, so it was a bit tougher. I cut it into a shape so that it would fit over the thimble and glued it on, left it to dry, and then I tried it on and thought, bloody hell, I can actually touch the string with this now. I sanded down the leather a bit too, but then I had to rub it onto a hard surface to make it shiny so it wouldn't grip too much. It had to be just right so you could move it up and down the string. Even with the thimbles on, it hurt. If you look at my middle index finger, you'll see a little bump on the end of it. Just underneath it is the bone. I had to be careful because sometimes if the thimbles come off and if I push hard on a string, the skin on the tips of my fingers just splits right open. The first ones I made fell off all the time, and it is trouble then. One of the roadies crawling about the stage going, "Where the has it gone?" So when I go on stage, I put surgical tape around my fingers, dab a little bit of super glue on that, and I push the things on. And at the end of the day, I have to pull them off again. I've only lost the thimbles a couple of times. I virtually live with the bloody things when I'm on tour. I keep them with me all the time. I've always got a spare set and my guitar tech has one as well. Going through customs with these things is another story. I have these thimbles in a box and they search your bag and go, "Ah, well, what's this? Drugs?" And then shock, it's fingers. I've had to explain it to customs on several occasions and they go, "Whoa." Putting my fake fingers away in disgust. Nowadays, the people at the hospital make the thimble for my ring finger. They actually make me a prosthetic limb, a complete arm, and all I use is 2 of the fingertips that I cut off it. I asked, why don't you just do me a finger? No, it's easier for us to give you a whole arm. So you can imagine what the dustman thinks when he finds an arm in the bin. The thimbles I cut off, it looks like real fingers. There's no leather on the ring finger. I can play with the material it's made of. They're too soft sometimes, so I leave them out in the air for a while to harden, or I put a bit of super glue on them to give them the right feel again. Otherwise, they grip the string too much. It's a process that takes ages. The homemade thimbles used to wear down, but these days the casing lasts. It's only the leather that wears out. Each thimble probably lasts a month, maybe half a tour, and when they start wearing out I have to go through the whole thing again. I still use the same piece of jacket I started with all those 40 odd years ago. There isn't much left of it now, but it should last another few years. It's primitive, but it works. You've either got to pack it in or you got to fight and work with it. It takes a lot of work. Making them is one stage, but trying to play with them is another. Because you have no feeling, you're aware of this lump on your finger, so you really have to practice at it to get it to work for you. Part of my sound comes from learning to play primarily with my 2 good fingers, the index and little finger. I'll lay chords like that, and then I put vibrato on them. I use the chopped off fingers mostly for soloing. When I bend strings, I bend them with my index finger, and I learn to bend them with my little finger. I can only bend them with the other fingers to a lesser extent. Before the accident, I didn't use the little finger at all, so I had to learn to use it. I'm limited because even with the thimbles, there are certain chords I will never be able to play. Where I used to play a full chord before the accident, I often can't do them now, so I compensate by making it sound fuller. For instance, I'll hit the E chord and the E note and put vibrato on it to make it sound bigger. So it's making up for that full sound that I would be able to play if I still had full use of all my fingers. That's how I developed a style of playing that suits my physical limitations. It's an unorthodox style, but it works for me. Well, that's the end of a painful chapter 6. Let me know what you thought of chapters 5 and 6 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.